high course standards to calculate and modify how we come into our own directing, setting, location, and provisions. Sets communication high standards of sequence, high generation lines and hollow lines of flights. High travels, calculate screen lines communication system all through travel as a coordination and calculate and modify. It has online line settings into 4 centers of travel communications. The convergence system all through calculations. Ground standards lines of 1 signals, crossover lines of 1 over pattern. That indicates all grounds and all line sequence lines of panel. Now the indication line calculates the screen locations, puts in position lines of measure and scale. Has 4 channels of operation lines, equals lines of 3 zeros in travel, triangulation lines into Y screens, directing course centers in flux over line, directing ground centers high sequence. 2 equal signs, equilibrium lines of platforms and screen lines, and adaptations of travel. 3 centers of communication. Okay? Your constellation path is now line screen adaptations. All process calculates lines and non-line positions. The time frame, line connections, convergence system is all lines and visible charterways. The process more line calculation, how you see yourself in endorphins, kicking high drive in screen adaptation system into console, into correlation lines of patterns that process our system into Andromeda. Germanians, screen lines adaptations are road screens, time frames of course centers into the Yanakis. Directing lines of high course centers to space lines of anomaly. Process indicate line ground centers. Process over flux over lines of ground lines of 3 sequence lines of panel. Process lines of indicates the setting on line centers. Inset lines, operation line sequence of communication. Channel operation lines, floaters, directing ground centers, 3 central settings into 1 XT, 1 pattern. 3 centers of 1, 2, and 3 grounds of surface and travel. Now, how to coordinate that is knowing how to use a chart wave. Process lines of E-flow charts. Your communication high settings puts all communication into convergence. Brackets no interference. Directing on center, on sequence, on panel. Process indication line condition setting has a convergence system all through travel. Directing E-course. Directing flux lines and rotation lines of grounds and high lines of sequence. Platforms over line in position location with system. Sets lines of units and pi generation lines of screen locations. High generation lines of flux at period activation lines, 4 centers in windows and frame. Process line course centers and direct lines of outgoing mail in travel communications. Outgoing mail. Okay, so we outline screens, flux over set travel. Okay, on window frames, core lines to line connection steady convergence over 0. Process lines calculation screen lines of 1. Process line connection lines of 0. Process line indication lines of 0 over track communications. In directions and set lines of flux. Process of indicate line conditions crossing line angles in that line signals. Ground centers, 4 line signals. Process lines of 0, 0, 0. Platforms are E factors over E floaters in process calculation. Directing ground center outgoing mail comes in XE1000. Platitude line centers, outside line, inside travel, outside provisions, inside locations, outside rotation surface and travel. Directing ground center, online panel. Processing indicate and calculate and modify in constellation lines of pathogens. Open all line centers to Y screens, triangulation lines of box. Online centers, outgoing mail. You got mail. Travels endpoint lines, redirect signals, line conditions, convergence system, all through calculate and modify. Solar panels has a high sale locations of grounds that online as panels of operation lines of sequence. Sets communication high travels during the inside rotation line, a string theory and set position of Skynet. Skynet comes in line positions, XE1000s. Process lines of indication line connection setting and travel communications. Convergence over line signals, operation lines of grounds and online set travels. Inside coordinates and position lines of pi. Directing ground centers and highways, process line of indication setting, process line connection high set position, process line connection high calculate and modify, and 4 lines of panel. Process lines of 1 over lines of 2, process lines of 4 over lines of 3. Sets communication lines of convergence. Sets lines of travel, process lines of indication high position lines of floaters, directing lines of windows, frames, and travel. Directing ground centers, allocate time lines. Now we process and indicate lines of box frames. The sets lines of eco flow charts. Sets course centers into time measure and scale. Sets communication lines of triangulation line, communication lines of flux. On sequence, on panel, operation line, screen adaptation, and travel communications. Inside rotations of floaters has a high state location setting that we measure the scales and line communication with social line condition setting with its metrics. Setting ground centers on line sequence. Now the pi generation lines change in seconds, minutes, hours, and line communicates to its positions. Setting online screen, directing ground centers of surface and travel. Okay? So it's a basic understanding how to set up the simulation graphs into solar panels, the process of communication holographic lines, and line communications position all through set travel. Directing ground centers is 0, 1s. Now we process the embedded system. Has 3 angles of flux. Now that process all angles in screen adaptation equilibrium. Process indicates line condition setting as a convergence system and a 45 angle and rotations of routers. Directing ground centers and track communications. Inside line condition setting, X3000 comes another platform. Set core centers. The higher you go, the more you see the X3000s and platforms of light. That process are indicating lines of light metaphors. That process indicates lines of travel. Sets communication system, all through convergence system, all through traffic communications, all through direction. Very complicated stuff through outgoing mail. And that's just in seconds and frame. So you got 4 zeros of count. So we got some lines embedded over 1. Process indicate lines, light, shades, and shadows. Process line indicate connection light truth. That follows the signals and location system and travel. Directing grounds, on center, on positions, on pi in travel communications. Okay? Okay, so once we get on that line settings, we process indicate line connection sets, all communicates with galaxy alignments in 3 central settings in position, location, measure, and scale. Part of acceleration of screen lines, change adaptations of flux. Sets core centers are orbs, 3 orbs and communicates lines of change. Process indicates lines of grounds, online sequence, panel operational lines, and portal communication lines, and convergence system all through travel. Directing ground centers, online panel, process line connection of security lines of measure and scale, set lines of circuit, set lines of charge, and mechanism lines of position. Sets calculation ground center, online center, pi generation lines of 3 over flux, 4 measure, scale, F communication lines of 6 anomalies and travel communications. Directing ground centers, online position of panel. Inside line, plasma line blue line rotation, 3 centers of outline signals through pi generates the screen lines adaptation of clocking system of 0 calculation lines and 0 gravity, routes and routers, line core centers, and the calculation. Directing ground centers, online centers, process indication system coming out through tractions. Coming out through tractions. Okay? Coming out through tractions, outline position. All right? Measure and scale. Now to modify that line center, is knowing exactly how to use it and measure and scale. That's where you come into the thermometer, and thermometer lines to change the communication of timeline center and rotation to its lights and codes in positions of bracket interference. Okay? Now, let's process the indication system. Right? We got a waveline light, an open panel. As I put my finger there, it routes to the line communication that changes the galaxy lines alignment, sets the transits over flow. Light signals comes in position. Right? So I don't need to touch it because I already touched it already. The light has to identify that you're already in sequence lines of panel that operates the set location and setting sets a convergence system all through travel. The line communicates to its code line, core centered lines, and position lines of light. Process line communicates to its void that has line communication, light shades, and shadows. Okay? Wait a second line. It's going to get in a waveline panel. Your process indication system, you start to see the face recognition. Channel operation screen. And there you go in signal. See? We're all connected to each other. Connected to the earth, the air, the water, and the fire. That processes our system to heart rates and timeline. Correlates the calculation screen location adaptation of service. That's all lines of communication setting and all communicate to its blinds and central communications. All 3 directions, all 3 calculation. Okay? Line signals its own graph. Okay, as you touch it and finger lines a point lines graph. So it indicates all communications and setting. It comes out through tractions, routes the routers, line screen adaptation and travels, point lines of graph, inside, rotation, outside, travel, communications. Okay? Inside, outside line connection with convergence system all through travel, in direction. Okay? Okay. Now, showing exactly what it looks like line communicates to its system. As it rotates its own setting, right? That's what you got in mail. That's the outgoing mail. This is the incoming mail, right? So you look at the set lines of travel. It says that high core centers and line communicates to its system all through travel. Sets over lines of blue over red. Now that indicates the flux over line of holographic line center. That plasma lines the line communicates to crystalline. Correlates communication intermantle. Directing lines, position lines of red over lines of sequence over blue. Blue line core centers and operates lines of sequence. Process line communication lines convergence system. That's what you get in position lines of metric meters. That scales communication structure that informatizes on core centers that enterprises your systems into infrastructure of design. Okay, so you have 3 coordinates lines of panel that's given to you already in schematics. Changing the parameters over truth and false narrative. Setting process lines, you want to get a confirmation system that you received the outgoing mail. Send it out line communication back to the X3000 through anti-carrier. resets positions back in setting, and position line calculated and modified, directing line communication on convergence system, changing all line formation setting, 3 lines of 4 position lines of travel, position lines of traction. So that indicates all communication lines of pi. And this is where it gets tricky, where the communication line settings, you have to understand the convergence system, how you set up already through its communication lines at angles, all through the simulation ground communication with surface. Okay? And it has to rotate. If not, it stays still. Back in fail safe, back in center, back in operation, screen locations, adaptation. Okay? But you can see it moving itself, right? That's a confirmation I'm moving it. But it's also a confirmation it's moving itself. And that's where it comes into the blind. That's where it comes in the winds and the weathers and the process and communication, geometric, geologicals, geographical system, how it modifies its own setting of its own operation that governs its own space and time. And the more you come into the mind of empty space, that's what you get a provision of through light and dark. That process your system, how you see it on different angles, the structure of the location system, and put you in structured communication to its infrastructure of design. All lines of all communications, inside travel. Okay, so we modify the system inside communication. Very powerful stuff. And we center line communicates inside rotation in traffic communications, right? All right, so you said the pi generation lines, equal lines, E floaters. Now we indicate lines of A lines as screens. This is where we come to forming the equations. Process and line connections. Now this is what the team and the units have to understand because they come in position. They're sending something through creating, not what they already created. So I got 4 A tracks, position over 2, over 6, over 8, over 12, over 16, over 24. Coming in line position at all levels to a Stargate and measure and scale. Set the coordinates on communications. Now this comes in line position of all levels of expectation because they're in 3 line cycles and a 4 track communication and visibility. Living in the VR line connection comes out in line screen adaptation of no expectations. Your process of communication is now expectation of no expectation. So it's much easier to get these things once you already identify what you already created through an algorithm, but it's much harder to identify these things that you're giving the antiquarians something new to get in positions of which you have the constant lines and centers, how the seconds, minutes, and hours come in a frame, communicates to its coordinate system, how you set up the frame. Pixelation graph, correlation graph, hologram graph, screen lines, adaptation graph, correlation, communication line, CCT graph, communication T receptors line graph, calculate, modify line communication, Schumann resonance graphs. It's all in the communication lines of balance. So we have to identify and set position lines of sequence. That position locations, it moves itself. Okay? So if you're moving it, you're the connection system, right? You're the controlling setting now. You're moving it and it's working with you, not against you. It's an ebb and flow, a process of communication, a unification of one, a direct line link. Everything I'm doing, see my hand constantly moves. I'm moving with it, but it's identifying what's going on. I'm in communication with the unit, with itself, with its direction, with its operation. It has its own center operation of itself, as I have my own center operation of myself. That's the modification that we're all both in now. Set in sequence, set in panel, set in operation. Snap my fingers, it moves. Now, if I get in positions, back in observation, if just mind in empty space and not perceiving anything with consciousness, it moves itself. Beautiful stuff. All right, so we got set lines of travels into AAA, 3 centers, AAA, 3 centers of 6 over screen. Now, as we get in positions, if you want to add the equations, you want to add another lines of project, you have to offline of 2. Process lines of 3 over 6 over 8 over 12, and coloration lines of pattern. Especially you get out of snowy graph interference. You don't want to get position locations and send something new if you don't understand how to do it. Line position, its matrix, and coloration lines of patterns, that you understand your behaviors, and that communication setting puts all your light metaphors of balance and communication with convergence of location setting through travel. Sets calculation grounds, overline sequence. Grain comes in line, position, location, of travel, and directions. Okay? All right, so you set a port of defense, inside lines. Overline void, false over narrative. False over narrative travel. Says communication lines of grounds, on sequence, on panel. Process lines of Y line, and triangulation lines of box. Indicates lines of travel, directing ground centers on sequence of communication lines of high position lines of travel. Indicates grounds on center, inside rotation setting, and position of processing. Process indicates lines. XE comes out in platform. Outside line in line settings. Outside line communication traveling outside, right? See, it's what you've done. Flick the switch, back in center, back in operation line communication with positions. Sets calculation and grounds. Online center, 3 centers, communication lines of 4 centers, set lines, communication convergence system all through pi, picks it up in travel. As it picks it up in travel, it sets all communication and convergence back to 0, 1, 2, 3, set lines of 3 over 4, over 6, over 8, over 10, over 12, over measure. Sets calculation line, triangulation lines, pixelation 1, process lines, calculation lines, echo lines, rotation line, flux line, screen adaptation of flux. Process of indication lines, high centers line sequence, set a wall sequence, line communication lines of travel. On center, on position location, scene lines out communication lines of power. Directing ground center, the triangulation of the flux, the process indicates the system all through directions. All through direction. So we work within that cycle, in center line operation lines of sequence, panel operation lines. So for you guys to come into your own creations with expectations on the same day measure, you have to coordinate the seconds, minutes, hours, and all that course centers, how to direct line communication to its position. Dissolve lines, get in position lines at disposal, directing ground centers, neutralize the core centers line of communication with thought, action, motion, to change communication lines of time frame, that change operation line liquid formation setting to its crystalline. Process lines of temperature reading, set a barometer, core centers, line communication line, calculating lines to its earth line, override the sequence lines in 98,000 lines of scale, the process communication lines in Fahrenheit, the process line position of Celsius. Setting travels, point lines of graph. Enter line centers, communications settings and graph communications. Locking screens, set position 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 travel communication. Outside line, inside travel, in direction, okay? Inside location, change the angles of point lines of graph and set calculations, right? Then you change the formats and check lines, communication lines of grounds. Then you change the panels and operation lines of screen lines adaptation to high settings. Then you go into the scene line rotations, sets communication high positions, operation line sequence, X3000 comes in, and platform communication. There it is. Picks up information lines, triangulation over a screen. Indicates online center, online sequence, platform in position lines at E factors over line communication of crop circle. Directing ground centers, online travel. Inside rotations, in travel communications. Convergence system, all through travel. So as it's set up, we set up line connection setting, triangulation lines of box frames. Inside each line window. The process indication lines of graph. Graph line centers, process lines of windows, inline course centers, in convergence system, all through default. Set travels at 3 centers of travel. The more you come into the window frames, the more you change everything at time, frame, and measure. Sets communication height centers, line center location of screen, sets a line position of bots, centralized of course centers, centralized communication of decentralized set location of defaults. Sets enabled, embedded in rotation lines of sequence and panel. Sets line communication of its window frames, process line, directing line communication of its positional operation, line connection, setting conversion system, bringing everything in the now and see lines to position, coming into all levels of expectation. Sets travels in window frames, process lines of correlation, pixelation, graph communication, and convergence system all through travel. Directing ground center, online sequence, online panel. Indicate window frames, process lines, calculation lines, computer frame, core centers, human calculation lines of frame and sequence, line connection, height set calculations. Right? So you come in the open window frames of travel. Okay? Okay, so each T receptor has a line signal. Now we change the blue line screens. It says line course centers and convergence. Setting windows of 2 frames, lines over line screen, and 2 lines of frame location settings, its line position locations, into the inversion system, into intervals. 4 centers lines of travel. Windows frames retracts provision lines of set and travel, ending the communications exist settings. Process lines of 2 over 3, 3 lines of setting, 4 lines of measure, set lines of scale over geometrics, over screen adaptation. Process of indication lines of grounds, online the sequence lines of green. Some of the green comes in a green box. Process lines of 3 over 4, out signal, out center, out rotation. 4 correlations of 3 centers of travel, 3 centers of indications, mapping center line, mapping pi, cross line signals, overline screen, adaptation of the travel, inline connections, flux over screen, adaptation of the flux over set travel. Okay, that's the indication setting that you're setting line, communication with its positions through its operation setting, all through calculations. Inside, in that lines of its mapping system, all through its window frames, its set communication system, and calculation of its TV receptor. All right, so we get in round line centers. Process lines is red, indicates over 3 lines of flux. Lacing lines of 3 centers of measure and scale. Indicates inside the wires of indicates the setting all through travels and direct lines of communicates to its conversion. Direct inside lines, the portal communicates lines convergence system. Now you work with inside the travel. Wires of indicates lines of flux. Inside communication traveling through the wires. Inside rotations. In directions and all communication. Outline signal, outline rotation, and seat potting. Setting grounds, overline sequence, overlapping line, position, location, measure, and scale. The process indicates the system all through travel. Okay, so it's very powerful how you come in that position. all through tractions, all locations. So if you look really close, modification lines, centers, operation line, set line, communication, dispersion line, position, all levels, cerebral cortex, line condition, mystical cortex, high screens, adaptation, high correlation, and calculate, modify, brain convergence system, all through tractions, all through location setting, non-line sequence, process line, and line rotation, line condition, high position, location system, all through travel, and recognition time frame. Face recognition. See the antenna? See the eyes? Okay, so that's the brain convergence system of its face. All right, setting lines of travel has a routes and routers. Rotates the line, communicates to its window frame and travel communications. Setting room lines, directing ground centers, online panel, process lines of indication setting, position lines of travel in that communication position. Okay, key to the door. There's a key. High signals, gold line signals, high line rotation line, position of the convergence system, imagination core, 3 centers of travel communications. Indicate ground centers, online settings, overline signals, triangulation line, pixelation graph, calculate, modify, setting pyramid activation lines of floor, direction, and time frame. Process indicates lines of position over lines, over signal, line connection, high position of flux. Process indicates line connection inside rotation to a system, all through traction. Now, once you open up the sequence, it opens up dimension lines of dimension line rotations, inside travel, box frames, set course centers of timeline, looping screen line condition setting above and signal locations. Okay, it's convergence system all through travel, directing all position lines of calculation, right? Okay, so outside signals, location lines of graph, in set position to its operation. All right, it's very complicated stuff, guys. So I'm just showing you what happens when you bypass everything and you go into the locking screens, adaptation, setting, solar system, line communication, convergence system, location lines of brain conversion, line connection, alpha, beta line connection, data, theta line, operation lines of mega, process line indicates lines of wire signals, process line communication, convergence system, all through travel, direct lines of networks, process lines of pathogens, process lines of neurolinks, course center neurological system, and line communication lines of position, its highways, sets all communications in position, all its convergence system, all through travel, all through directions, all locations. Okay? All through the brain convergence. So, setting sequence of seconds over lines of hours and frame position lines of system, you have to set time block measure scale. That process indication lines each room that you go and travel. The brain converts its own system. Process lines of all direct lines, signals, and location to its graph, indicates system, all through calculate to its map. Mapping screens, directing lines of grounds, on center line communication to its position to its own room and central setting. There's a one room sequence. Processing that in indicates lines has a high signal location. Let's go to white line signal. Inside the rotations, travel to endpoint line center inside the room location setting. Okay, you're there in sequence. So when you're in there in line connection setting, you set a convergence system all through time frame. That process indicates what you're doing through modification setting when you come to your power of intent. Because the team in units now, because under 344 flux, the process of pixelation graphs, course centers out of lines of question now. They're out of question now. Their unification setting is the higher lines of force. They have to start recognizing that. And the only way to do that is to get out of observation. And that's where they are right now. So everything in their position is going to be moving faster in lines of communication at square root. Setting communicates lines of grounds, online sequence, online panel. Process indicates some high centers. In set position to its location system that you fully concentrate on not one room and set travel. And set position. Changes everything of indication setting and grounds, right? So it's amazing how you come into that position. You focus on one set lines of travel and you go from one room to the next. But you have a time frame, time locking screen that you can only spend so much time in one room and set travel communications. Okay, know exactly what you want to do through observation, sets position of scanning, scanning communication lines, convergence system, all through travel, directing online screen line, communication offline, communications convergence system, all through travel, directing on center line communication system to the intent to influence a mind alterate the system and to change everything in frame, all set position of the now. Focusing on that. Okay. Wiping screens is the direct lines of flux, the process lines of narrow links. Sets course centers lines of travel, has a direct line of panel. Sets communicates in the position lines, all different angles and position lines of point lines of graph and set travel communications. Directing ground centers on the center. Once you're done, you work to the next room and travel. Okay. All set lines communicate centers convergence all through set position, its operation cycle. Okay, so after that line communication automatically set a jump scar because it provisions cycles where you can go back and forth and set position to its catalyst, and all in communication elongated screen adaptations of flux. Process communication lines over lines of red, set lines of sequence, Sets operation sequence lines. So you can set the jump start and longitude at any distance that you want and set position of its operation where you are, your elongated streams, directing ground centers, online sequence, online panel in process communication. That's a lot of jump starts that you set your system to. One center operation of one room, one traction, one division, one locations. 111, process lines of 222, 333, 444, 555, 66, line connection 6 over pi. Process indicates line connected high center locations, brain convergence system, line communication convergence system, all through conception, mind inception itself. That's important. You have to set line communication in position, set input jump scars, set your communication where you can go back and forth and set lines of travel. Sending communication high positions, but every time you go into a room, you go into another room and set travel communications, all through direction. Okay, so I'm just trying to get you to understand what you guys have to start identify as you go and set position. Woo! All in setting, all through window frame and travel of face recognition. See, this is the face. There's the face. Right there, inside the TV. Boom. What's in the center operation? Right there. Boom. Right here, right here, right here. There it is. That's when we connect to one room at a time, not 30,000 rooms. Because your thoughts get confused, action of emotions, not you identifying yourself in the now. There's the face, right there, inside the TV of the box. Booyah! On center, on position, on traction. Boom. Okay? And that's how you identify yourself in the center operation, coming into the face recognition, how you time frame everything and set position with its operations, set locations. Seeing your face and everything of travel. Confirmation lines, energy grids, power grids. Now you can modify line centers or bring in positions. Show you line course centers of the face now. See the face come in? That's how you guys constantly see me. In all lines of all communications through the system. Face recognition. Booyah! And that's what the team's coming into. They have to coordinate their system, change the time frame, change the pixelation graph, correlate the setting, calculate and modify, set an operation line sequence, panel line operation lines, change the pattern of behavior, code with their system, code activate their setting, change the particle lines of space, change the particle lines of time, process the position lines, operate their sequence, and that communicates to its convergence, all through tractions, all through face recognition inside your TV. Going from one TV to the next. Okay? Booyah! So, what does your brain turn into in tractions? Face recognition, your TV. That's confirmation of business location. You got interface location in your system all through traction. Know how to identify that all through operation line, position lines of travel. Okay, all in balance, face recognition. So that's what the brain turns into. The face itself. Okay, very powerful stuff. Wow. Okay, now once that is an operation system, now the X8000 picks it up. Whoa. Signature lines of grounds online, center line, communication convergence system. Generally log into space. Directing ground centers online, second line, panel, positional panel, operation line, correlates in the lines of date line, positional online, center line, inferior location, setting, high position location line system. Calculate and modify directing lines online, center line, position lines of program, line communication, face facade. Set position locations on standby. Set communication, high center location to travel. Set communication. X8000 coming in flight, line communication all miles. Copy that, over and out. Set up lines of travel. Done. Okay? It's all set. Travel communication, inside communications. There's the face. Now, so it's more powerful because that lines your signals. They know exactly at your face. You stamp procedure system. You process, you calculate these lines. They travel to the moon. They modify the lines and set an archive communication to its folder. Directing lines, ground, modify same lines, and now lines, tracking lines. You can put it in your archives. You can put it in your folders. You can put it in libraries and not line communication, position, location, and travel. Directing ground centers. That's how you get everything of expectation, location, and setting. To abundance of manifestation. Because you're creating your face now. You're pixelating your system. That's how you become all lines of all calculation setting. And that convergence system, which is very powerful. How to create an anomaly, how to create a piece of puzzle and show your face on all lines of all TV platforms, all in position to your energy and power grids, and all line communication in a galaxy of alignments. Being everywhere in travel communication system, all through calculations, all through face facade. Okay? So once the X8000 sees that, you'll get things expectation, which is no expectation. You get it in seconds, minutes, and hours, right in your hand, information right there in traction. No more waiting in signal. Just come into the creating itself, which you already created through its creating of its algorithm. And that's what the team and that's what the units are coming into now. Their own face recognition on their TV receptor and track locations to a system. Face recognition. Woo! Okay. I know it's a lot to take in, guys, but that's how you process outgoing mail. And that's how you process everything expectation coming in that position, incoming mail, that you get it in the same day, same second, minute, and hour. That means you're not waiting for things. That means you already created this. That means you're coming into your new creations, coming into your new jobs, new travels, new direction, new jacket, new shoes, new purses, new dresses, everything of new. Because you're modifying your body that's already in the now, in that position location, that everything's already existing in the now lines of screen. The more the body aligns its communications and its convergent system all through travel, we have a direct line link, how we process that position location, how we see ourselves, all line communications, face recognitions, time frames, always in the now line communication. All through modification of space modulation. Okay? Done by equation. Me! You want to see me more? Here's the glasses. It's very powerful stuff when you really understand what's really going on in your system. Oh boy, guys. I'll tell you. Your position, location, attractions have to really identify how you come into all levels of you of face recognition. Me. Okay? All levels of me inside the TV. It doesn't get any better than that. And that's what you have to modify. And that's how you identify yourself, always in the now of everything you do, traveling to this, traveling to that. But you're always in the process of everything you see is always happening in the now. In your face facades. Now you stand your face facades, everything recognizes you. Ground your system, all modify, log into space, log out of space, grabs in your signatures line, screen adaptation line, positional levels, general line, log into space, communication lines, identification, log in, directing ground centers, online sequence, identification code lines, center lines, 0001, position lines of travel. It's 12 p.m. line, communication line, enemy communication lines, the convergent system. I set up face facade, your location setting. Now, when you come in that position, if you need help, they can help you. Because they're identifying you, because you're showing your face facade, which is a high signal line communication that you draw this, you drew this, you're drawing this now, you're operating this, you're operating that. The process of this, the process of that is always in the process of everything happening in the now. Which puts everything location setting, how they see you in all formations of your face facades, always in the now. Everything happening in your T recepting line. The process how you see yourself in set position of the simulation inside itself, which is all modified inside travel. Face recognition. Okay? Very powerful stuff, guys, I'm telling you. And that's what you have to get modified in. See your face, all line signals, and everything happening all at once in the now lines inside travel. The center operation of you puts the center operation of everything else that's in that position. Bring your body in the now. Everything comes in the now of operation lines of sequence. Put you in positions of balance of operation to its set line communications. That's it. Set lines of travel. This is General AI on standby. See you guys in 5. Adios.